If you're thinking of moving to Vancouver and buying a home, there are 9 key factors that you want to be aware of before you make the move. From hidden taxes to hyper-local construction issues to geography, all the way to the lifestyle differences that you're going to encounter. In this video, I'm breaking down 9 of the biggest things that blindside home buyers in Vancouver. Don't miss any of this video. Let's get into all of it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver, and I make videos just like this one every single week. This week's video is all about the 9 things that blindside home buyers in Vancouver, whether you're new to the city or you already live here. If you're thinking of buying a home, this is critical information for you. And I've been helping people buy and sell homes in Vancouver for nearly 20 years. I've lived here almost my entire life for 50 years, and I've seen so many people come into this city and be shocked and blindsided and swept away by some of these things. I don't want you to be one of those people. So right off the bat, let's get into the new construction trap. And this is my most recent addition to this list, and something that is very, very topical and recent, and that if you're thinking of buying a home in Vancouver, you really want to make sure that you understand. For so long in our history, for the last 25 years or so, so many people were making a killing buying new construction. And so many people that have bought in the last few years were chasing after that dream, seeing what their neighbors had done, seeing what their family and their friends had done, and thinking that it was a slam dunk to buy new construction from developers. Unfortunately, what they're finding today is that that's not the case, and they're finding themselves underwater. And that is for a few reasons. For one, the price and the value of land has risen so quickly and dramatically, as well as the cost of construction has risen so quickly and dramatically. And so for developers to find any profit margin, they've had to sell these properties at a premium. And that's a significant premium to what already existing homes are selling for. Now, that worked fine in an environment that people were chasing after these kinds of properties. But for the last few years, we've had a fairly flat market. And especially today, right now, we have an abundance of new construction. We have so many developments that are stalled or at completion or very close to completion, that these are all projects that you would be competing against if you purchased one of these properties in the last few years. And on top of already high purchase price that you paid, you most likely also paid GST, the federal tax, which is 5% on a new property, as well as the property transfer tax, which is 1% on the first 200,000 and 2% on the balance. So in order to just break even, you are already way behind the 8 ball. It is frankly impossible to catch up if the market is entirely flat. And there is nothing on the horizon that appears to be changing. Now, in a few years' time, we might be in an entirely different environment where it makes sense to buy pre-sale once again. But if you are looking at your property as an investment in order to make some money and you don't want to lose equity, I would advise people to stay away from buying pre-sale so they avoid the new construction trap. And keep in mind, right now, there are great opportunities in the resale market. So as an example, in the West End, you can buy an older, very solid concrete construction building where you're looking at about $1,000 a square foot, somewhere in that $1,000 to $1,100 a square foot. If you're a first-time buyer, if you're an investor, there are excellent opportunities in the West End right now to buy something that's a little bit older. But at the same time, a developer who's building right next door can't build for that same amount of money. They need to charge somewhere in the range of $1,500 to $2,000 a square foot, basically just to break even. So the opportunity right now in this current market environment is those older condos. One of the things that I've seen blindside so many people is the pace of change in Vancouver and the fact that really no neighborhood stays exactly the same. I've had so many conversations over my 50 years in this city with people that get really frustrated or hurt or upset about that pace of change and the fact that the neighborhood they once knew, the area that they loved, is not the same as they remember it. And I think we should all remember that cities are growing, dynamic, living, breathing things. And frankly, actually, I said growing, but not all of them grow. Some of them die. But honestly, the last 50 years have seen so much change in Vancouver, and that pace of change is honestly only increasing. It is not decreasing. And that pace of change has been, in my opinion, in a lot of ways positive for the city. There's some negative things about it, but there is so much more to love about this city. There's so much more that's dynamic and interesting about this city than the city that I remember from, the very young period of my life in the 1970s and the early 80s. We once were a provincial backwater and we no longer are. But I don't want to get too much into the politics of whether it's good or bad. The reality is it's just going to continue changing. And so before long, the house right next door to you might be torn down and a larger house might be built, or there might be a couple townhouses built or a half duplex, or there could be a few houses torn down at the end of your block where there now is going to be a condo building, or there could be a coffee shop put in there. Or I was just hearing on the news that a new proposal for a 40-story tower was going on at the base of Main Street. And there's a lot of people that are going to be upset about that. But when I was young, there were a lot of people that were upset about a house on a giant lot being replaced by 3 new houses on that single lot. The only thing that we can count on living in a city is going to change, and it is going to continue to change. You can hope that it keeps moving in a positive direction, of course, and you can do your best to try and move this city in that positive direction, but change will come, and that is something you should not be blindsided by when you move to Vancouver. Bridges, bridges, bridges. We have so many bridges, and it's really hard to tell you exactly how many there are. There's anywhere from 20 to 30 significant road bridges in Metro Vancouver. It really depends on how you define them exactly, but let's say there's about 25. Of course, we live in a coastal city, and we live at a river delta. So there are bays and there are creeks and there are rivers and there's deltas, all of that stuff we need to crisscross in order to get from one place to another place. And so many of the cities within Metro Vancouver are separated by these bridges. And so if you're not from here and you look at a map and you think about the way a crow flies and, this is 10 kilometers, point A is 10 kilometers from point B, that should take me roughly 20 minutes. Well, yes, in a perfect world, on a perfect day, most likely that would take you 20 minutes. But the bridges that we have and the one significant tunnel that we have tend to be bottlenecks. And in rush hour, all hell breaks loose. And really, it's very hard to predict how much time it might take to get from point A to point B, depending on the number of river crossings or bridges that you have to cross. And coming, let's say, from Tsawwassen into downtown Vancouver, you'd have a tunnel, a second bridge, maybe 3 bridges, and definitely a 4th bridge. So there's anywhere from 3 to 4 bottlenecks that you have to consider in that commute. If there's a backup on any one of them or on all of them, that significantly alters your commute. That's something that you really need to be aware of when you're considering where you want to live in Metro Vancouver. And my general piece of advice is to remove as many of those bottlenecks as you can. Live as close as possible to where you work to make that journey as efficient as possible. The reality is, though, that some people can't make that choice and they're limited by budget. And so the harder that commute is, the more of these river crossings that you have to endure out of downtown Vancouver, the cheaper land gets. And so downtown Vancouver is where we see the most expensive real estate. But if you only have to cross from False Creek, from the west side of Vancouver into downtown, the value of the land isn't reducing significantly. But if that commute is an extra half hour, an extra 40 minutes, well, you might be finding that you're paying 30% less, 40% less for the same amount of land. So this is why an area like Surrey is much cheaper than an area like downtown Vancouver, because it's a significant commute and you have these bottlenecks in between living in Surrey and living in downtown Vancouver. So do not just look at a map and make assumptions about how long those commutes are going to take you. Definitely take into account the worst case scenario about your commute. It does shift if you're not relying on a car, and you can rely on the West Coast Express or the SkyTrain, but you really don't want to be blindsided by the fact that we are a coastal city at a river delta, that a lot of our transportation network relies on crossing those waterways by bridges and tunnels. Whether you want to cross a bridge or not, if you're looking at moving to Vancouver and buying a home, I'm a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of people do exactly what you're trying to do. Find the right neighborhood and find the right home. I can help you and your family whenever you're ready. My contact information is right there on the screen. Be sure to reach out anytime. But for now, let's get back to the video. Next, I want to talk about some assumptions people make in other markets. Typically, you're probably going to buy a house and you're most likely going to live in the city that you want to live in. Well, that's not necessarily the case when you come to Vancouver. Keep in mind, in Vancouver, most people don't actually live in houses. And the likelihood is when you move here, you probably won't either. It is roughly only 25% of our housing stock are houses. And so very few people actually live in houses. So Most of the people that live in Vancouver, well over 75% of them actually live in multiple dwelling units. Whether it's apartment buildings, condo buildings, townhouses, or half duplexes, that is where more than likely you're going to end up when you move to Vancouver. Do not make the mistake of feeling like you have to own a house. There are other options. Whether you are single, a couple, or you have 3 kids, people are living in all of these other types of properties in Metro Vancouver. The answer does not have to be a house. We do have other alternatives. Yes, a house may be the ideal, but there are so many people that find they can simply not afford to own a house. Depending on the market in the city of Vancouver, it could be anywhere from $2 million to $5 million to purchase a house, where you might be able to buy a livable family quality condo for about $1 million, a really nice townhouse for $1.2 to $1.5 million, or a half duplex for somewhere in the range of $1.5 million to $2 million. So there are options, things that are much less expensive than owning a single family house. The same is true for making the assumption that when you move here, you have to live in Vancouver. So many people assume that they do. They think of the brand of Vancouver, but there are other alternatives. We live in Metro Vancouver, where there are roughly 21 other municipalities other than the city of Vancouver. This region has 3.5 million people, and the city of Vancouver has just 750,000 people. So of course, most of the people that move here don't actually end up living in Vancouver, and you don't have to feel bad about it. The borders between one municipality to another are relatively arbitrary. And at some point, we just stopped amalgamating cities. And so a city like Burnaby, frankly, the border between Vancouver and Burnaby is rather arbitrary. More or less, these two cities, in many other regions, these cities would have amalgamated. So the city of Calgary, the city of Toronto, the city of Montreal, all of these cities are geographically way bigger than the city of Vancouver. City of Vancouver is only 110 square kilometers. As I said, it has just 750,000 people. Don't feel that you have to live in the city of Vancouver to make a go of it. It can be a viable lifestyle, a really nice place to live just on the outside of Vancouver, whether it's in North Vancouver, Burnaby, Coquitlam, Richmond, Tawasin, all of these suburbs are great places to live and not necessarily a significant compromise to be made. You want to challenge the assumptions you might have coming from another place, because they're assumptions that don't necessarily hold water in Vancouver. All right, let's talk about those hidden taxes. You don't want to be blindsided by taxes. That's the worst thing ever. There are a number of taxes you definitely need to be aware of. So first, I'm going to break these down into 3 different categories. We're going to talk about one-time taxes that you pay on the purchase of a property. We're going to talk about some potential ongoing taxes. And then we're going to talk about a new tax that impacts you if you're selling a property. So first of all, let's get into those taxes that you need to expect when you're purchasing property here in Vancouver. Number 1 is the property transfer tax. That is a tax levied by the provincial government on every single transaction, and it's levied on the buyer. So you have to pay 1% on the first $200,000, 2% on the balance from $200,000 up to $2 million. And then from $2 million to $3 million, it's 3%. And from $3 million onwards, they add an extra 2%, which by my calculation means you're paying 5% on any value over $3 million. This is a very, very significant tax that you absolutely need to be aware of. Of course, there's only the one tax. And if you are moving here from Toronto, as an example, that's a market where not only do they have the provincial tax, but they also have a local city tax on property transfers. We don't have that. Thankfully, we only have the single provincial tax, but it is quite substantial. On top of that tax, if you're buying new construction, the federal government is going to charge you GST. And that tax is another very substantial amount. That is 5%. So if you're buying new construction, not only are you paying the property transfer tax already, but on top of that, you're also going to be paying the GST. There are some exemptions, and we can get into those details if we talk and you're in one of those positions. I'll let you know. But most of us are going to be paying property transfer tax on any transaction, on any purchase, and we're going to be paying both the property transfer tax and GST on any new home purchase. Next, let's talk about those ongoing taxes. And really, where you need to be concerned is if you want a second home here, or if you're planning on keeping your home here vacant. There are taxes both the province and the city of Vancouver levy to prevent you from being able to do that. So the province levies the speculation and vacancy tax. And in 2026, that's going to be 3% for non-Canadians and 1% for Canadians and permanent residents. If your property is deemed to be vacant for at least 6 months of the year, you may be on the hook for this tax. And that is a very significant tax. It's not just a one-time levy. It's any year year that you're deemed to own a vacant property. I should mention that 3% and that 1%, that is based on the BC assessment value. So that value changes from year to year. So those tax rates can shift. Then, of course, we also have the empty homes tax. This is levied just in the city of Vancouver, but it's a very similar tax. Basically, if your property is deemed to be vacant for 6 months of the year or more, you're going to be on the hook to pay this tax to the city of Vancouver. And this tax makes no exceptions, whether you are Canadian or not. Everybody has to pay 3% to the city of Vancouver if they have a property that is vacant or deemed to be vacant for at least 6 months of the year. And lastly, we're talking about that tax you have to think about when you're selling a property, and that is the BC home flipping tax. That was recently announced. It's a new tax that you need to have on your radar. It is only going to impact you if you're looking to sell your home in the first couple years of ownership. And what they're trying to do is prevent the real estate market from taking off and prices rising too quickly. They viewed this as one of the reasons that it happened. And so what the government is saying, if you want to flip a property, no problem, but we'd like a piece of the action. So if you try and resell a property within the first year of home ownership, you're going to have to pay 20% of any profits that you make to the provincial government. And if you do it in the first 2 years, so in that after the first year into the second year, you're going to have to pay a declining share of that tax to the provincial government. It's just something that you should have on your radar. Most people aren't going to be planning on selling that quickly, and there are many exceptions, but it is up to the provincial government to decide whether or not they're going to levy the tax on you. And more than likely, they're probably going to find a way to do it. Okay, here's one that surprises a lot of people that move to this area: school catchments. If you live in a school catchment, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you access to that school. And I know so many people come here saying, I want to live in this particular school catchment. You're used to having this as a primary factor in your decision for buying a home in other markets. No matter where you live, more than likely the school catchment that your house resides in is a big factor in why you chose to live there. But the reality in Vancouver is many of our schools are oversubscribed. We have so many small schools in the city and such high population density that so many of the schools just don't have room. And I know, as an example, at my kids' school, there were 3 kids in my daughter's year who actually lived on the street that the school is on who didn't get into that kindergarten class because they only had room for 1 kindergarten class. They didn't have enough kids who applied to put a second kindergarten class in that school. And so they had to choose some kids to go to other schools. In subsequent years, there's generally room to get back into that school. And I know, going back to this example, all the kids obviously who lived on that street all really wanted to go back to that school when there was room for them. But the reality in this market is that being in a school catchment doesn't actually guarantee you access to the school, whether it is in elementary school or it is in high school. You have to be ready for the possibility that you may not get into the school that you want. It is also true that in some parts of the city, there are just not enough schools. So in downtown Vancouver, as an example, we didn't expect so many families to stay there. And so they're really scrambling. They're way behind the 8 ball in providing the kind of the level of, there's just not enough spots for all the children that live in that area. And so many of the people that live in the West End or in Cole Harbour are shipping their kids to outside of those areas to schools that are maybe in Mount Pleasant or in False Creek rather than the school that is in the West End. Now, this is very different for private school. Obviously, there are no catchments for private schools. And so if you decide to send your kids to private school and you get accepted and you're willing to pay for the spot, well, of course, then you get that spot. But there are no guarantees when it comes to public school. And this is a great place to mention also that there's a real challenge when it comes to daycare before your kids get to public school. There's a real challenge around accessing those spots, and you're going to find it incredibly difficult. It is like a full contact sport getting your kids into daycare. It feels like winning the lottery when you actually get them into daycare. So if there's any piece of advice that you can take away from this video and you have children, make sure that you're applying often and early when it comes to daycare spots. And be the greasy wheel. Try and make sure that they're aware of you and that you look for updates with the daycares as where you might be on those waiting lists. That's really, really important. But going back to schools, keep in mind that where you live and the catchment that you are in, that does not necessarily give you a guarantee of access to the school you want. There's 2 hyper-local factors that you really need to be thinking about when you're purchasing a property in Vancouver. And this is going to depend on whether you're looking at a house or looking at buying a condo or a townhouse. There are different issues that you need to have top of mind, but these are very hyper-local and specific to Vancouver. I've covered them in other videos in greater depth. I'm just going to touch on them here just to make sure that you get a little taste for what you need to be aware aware of. But you're going to want to go back to some of my older videos. I'm going to link them here where appropriate so that you get a better, deeper understanding if you're curious. But let's talk about houses specifically right now. And the biggest issue in our market when purchasing a house is the existence of an oil tank. And the reason that an oil tank is important is we once heated houses with oil, heating oil in Vancouver, but we no longer do. And that changed in the 60s. And at the time, they didn't necessarily remove those tanks. They often just left them. They got decommissioned. And what that meant is they removed most of the oil, but they didn't usually take all of the oil. And so instead of 1,000 or 2,000 liters of oil in there, there may have been 50 liters or 100 liters or 150 liters left in that tank. Of course, 50, 60 years later, those tanks could have corroded, and the oil that is in there mixed with water may have leaked out of those tanks. And that becomes an environmental concern. And as a result, there's legislation, there's laws in place that says any homeowner that is aware of an oil tank's existence is responsible for its removal. And it's not just the removal of the tank itself, but it's also the contaminated soil. And this is where it gets tricky and becomes a significant liability for the homeowner, because if that tank exists, if there was oil in that tank and that tank is now corroded and you're on a slope, as an example, that oil could have not just stayed on your property, but it could have gone down the hill underneath 2 or 3 of your neighbors' properties, and you're on the hook for cleaning that. This bill for that kind of cleanup, I have heard extreme cases where this can cost well over $1 million. And that is an insane potential liability that you want to make sure you're protecting yourself. You want to be working with an agent who understands this nuance, who understands this market, and is going to protect you and help educate you as to these kinds of risks. So that's the oil tank risk that you might find. And you're going to want to check out this video all about buying houses and the risks involved in buying houses to learn more about that. But when looking at condos or townhouses, there's a different risk that you need to be aware of and a different potential liability. And that's whether or not this property has been rain screened. And rain screening is a building technology that we now use. We've been using it since roughly the year 2000 in Vancouver. So more or less, when something is built in the year 2000 or later, this isn't as big of a concern. It's something you should still understand and you should still be aware of. But the real era of construction that you really need to be concerned about is anything built in the 1980s and the 1990s. Roughly 1982 to 1999, that is the era of the leaky condo, and where we did not build with rain screen technology. And there is, once again, a significant risk, a significant liability, because if these buildings are found to be leaking, they must be fixed. And the potential cost of that work could be tens of thousands of dollars, but it could also be hundreds of thousands of dollars that you individually will be on the hook for. Stratas do not have the savings to cover that kind of expense. And as an owner, you would be responsible for paying your share. And I have seen bills in the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 range for a building to be rehabilitated. And this is something you want to understand before you purchase a condo, before you purchase a townhouse, so you know if this is a potential risk and a potential liability for you as the next homeowner. And of course, I also have videos that explain this. There's a video right here all about the risks of buying a condo that will help you understand the rain screening liability a lot better. We'll get into a lot more depth so that you can avoid being blindsided by these issues. You don't want to be moving to Vancouver and get blindsided by the reality of living here, that different parts of Metro Vancouver can feel and be very different from one another. And where I think this is easiest to explain is when we talk about the weather. So many people make this assumption that Vancouver is incredibly wet and rainy. The reality is, yeah, we get rain, and yes, it's more than most of the other cities across Canada. It's definitely more than the prairies, but it's kind of a little bit less than a lot of the Maritimes. It's kind of similar to some of Ontario. Most of our rain is going to be in the winter months. We get a very, very dry summer. So that's the basis, the ground of understanding that we have. But the reality is that different parts of Metro Vancouver are actually really, really different. There are parts of Metro Vancouver that get roughly double the amount of rain that the city of Vancouver does. And here I'm looking at you, North Vancouver. And then there's some parts of Metro Vancouver, and here we're looking at Delta, that get about half as much rain as the city of Vancouver. So there's pretty big extremes that you can find. And so as an example, if you're really sensitive to weather, if you want more sunlight, if you want warmer temperatures and less rain, well, there are parts of Metro Vancouver where you can find that. And if you actually are coming here thinking that you'd really enjoy the coziness, the wet, the damp, living in a rainforest, well, there's parts of Metro Vancouver that probably make more sense for you. And so you do need to have that understanding that there's an enormous variety at offer in Metro Vancouver. And it's not just the weather. That's just the easiest way to explain it, but it's true of culture. It's true for accessibility. It's true for transportation. It's true for all types of things that you might be thinking about when it comes to where you might want to live. And once again, this is where it makes sense to be talking to somebody who's been doing this for a long time. And so all of these differences around the Metro Vancouver region and even within the city of Vancouver is yet another reason why it's so important to be working with a real estate agent that really understands this marketplace and has the patience to explain it to you and help figure out what makes sense for you. So if you're thinking of moving here and you're thinking of buying a home, don't forget that I am a real estate agent that has been doing this for almost 18 years. I've helped hundreds and hundreds of people do exactly what you're trying to do. Find the right neighborhood and find the right home. And I can help you and your family whenever you're ready. My contact information is right there on the screen, so be sure to reach out anytime. And of course, this channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver, and I put out videos just like this one every single week. I really do appreciate you watching this video. But if you are interested in moving here and you're thinking of buying a home, there is one more video that I really think you're going to want to check out. This is a video I did recently, and I'm really, really proud of because it's all about the types of condos you should avoid when moving to Vancouver. And it's this video right here. I hope to meet you all over here. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next week.